They called us primitives. Barbarians clinging to a backwater rock in the outer rim. The Galactic Council had ruled the stars for 10,000 years, their mighty warships enforcing peace across a million worlds. Their technology was beyond comprehension, their fleets numberless, their arrogance absolute. But they made one crucial mistake. They underestimated what happens when you corner a species that spent millennia perfecting the art of war against itself. They didn't understand that every human conflict, every bloody revolution, every desperate last stand had been practice. Training for the day we'd face something bigger than ourselves. The day humanity said no to the galaxy's self-appointed gods. This is the story of how Earth's most unlikely heroes brought down the Council's greatest warship, not through superior technology or ancient wisdom, but through pure human stubbornness, creativity, and the kind of insane bravery that only comes from having absolutely nothing left to lose. The galaxy thought it knew what humans were capable of. It was wrong. The notification chimed across every screen on Earth simultaneously. Emergency broadcasts interrupted entertainment programs, work meetings, and casual conversations as the same message appeared in dozens of languages. Citizens of Sol 3, you have been selected for integration into the Galactic Council. Compliance is mandatory. Resistance is futile. Preparation time, 72 standard hours. Captain Sarah Chen stared at her coffee mug, watching the dark liquid vibrate with each distant rumble from the massive ships positioning themselves in Earth's orbit. Through the reinforced windows of the International Space Defense Command Center, she could see them, impossibly large vessels that dwarfed the International Space Station like a cathedral compared to a child's toy. The largest of them, the one the aliens called the Sovereign's Reach, stretched nearly 50 kilometers from bow to stern, its hull gleaming with energy barriers that made the metal appear to flow like liquid mercury. "Ma'am, we're receiving another transmission," Lieutenant Rodriguez called from his station, his voice tight with the kind of control that comes from years of military training fighting against naked terror. It's the same message, but this time they're including what they call cultural preparation guidelines. Chen took a slow sip of her coffee, using the bitter warmth to center herself. Around the command center, dozens of the world's best military minds sat frozen at their stations, staring at screens full of data that made no sense according to any physics textbook ever written. Energy readings that broke their instruments. Ship masses that should have collapsed into black holes. Weapon signatures that suggested the ability to crack planets like eggs. "Put it on the main screen, Lieutenant." The holographic display shimmered to life, revealing a figure that was almost human but wrong in ways that made Chen's skin crawl. Too tall, too thin, with eyes that held far too much intelligence and not nearly enough warmth. When it spoke, the words came through perfect translation software, but Chen could hear the condescension bleeding through every syllable. "Primitive inhabitants of the Sol system," the alien began, its voice carrying the casual authority of someone addressing particularly slow children. "I am High Admiral Vexthani of the Galactic Council's integration fleet. Your species has reached the threshold of interstellar awareness and must now be brought into proper galactic civilization. Do not mistake this for conquest, we are here to elevate you." Chen snorted. Around the command center, she heard similar sounds of disbelief from officers who had spent their careers studying the fine art of reading between political lines. The alien continued, oblivious to Earth's reaction. "Your current governmental structures will be dissolved and replaced with council-approved administrative systems. Your military forces will be disbanded, as violence is no longer necessary under council protection. Your technological development will be guided along approved pathways to prevent the kind of catastrophic mistakes that lesser species often make when left to their own devices." "Lesser species," muttered Colonel Harrison from the tactical station. "Did this walking coat hanger just call us a lesser species?" The transmission wasn't finished. High Admiral Vexthani gestured, and the display shifted to show detailed schematics of Earth's major cities, marked with landing zones and administrative centers. "Integration will begin in 72 hours. Citizens will gather at designated collection points for processing and relocation to appropriate work assignments throughout the galaxy. Cooperation will be rewarded. Resistance will be corrected." The screen went dark, leaving the command center in stunned silence broken only by the hum of computers and the distant rumble of ships that had no business existing according to everything humanity thought it knew about the universe. Chen set down her coffee mug with deliberate care and stood up. Every eye in the room turned to her, and she could see the question written on every face: what do we do when facing the impossible? All right, people, listen up, she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. I don't care if those ships out there run on magic and good intentions. I don't care if they can turn Jupiter into a paperweight or make the sun sneeze. What I care about is that some alien asshole just told humanity to roll over and play dead. She walked to the main tactical display, where Earth hung in the center surrounded by red dots representing the Council fleet. The largest dot, marking the Sovereign's reach, pulsed like a malevolent heart. Rodriguez, I want every piece of intelligence we can gather on these ships. Power signatures, defensive capabilities, communication frequencies, crew complements if you can get them. I don't care if you have to count the windows. Yes, ma'am, but, Captain, our sensors can barely penetrate their hull plating. The technology gap is enormous, Chen finished. I know. But, here's what our new alien friends don't know about humans, Lieutenant. We've been fighting impossible odds since we figured out how to sharpen sticks. We took down mammoths with pointy rocks. We sailed across oceans in wooden boxes. We split the atom with slide rules and determination. She pointed at the largest ship on the display. That thing up there? It's big, it's scary, and it probably has enough firepower to glass the planet. But it's still just a machine built by people who think they know everything. And people who think they know everything always miss something important. Colonel Harrison leaned forward in his chair. What are you thinking, Captain? I'm thinking that in 72 hours, they expect us to line up nice and neat for processing like good little primitives. I'm thinking they've probably done this integration routine 1,000 times with 1,000 different species, and it's become so routine they don't even pay attention anymore. Chen's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. I'm thinking we're about to teach the Galactic Council why humans don't integrate well with anyone, including ourselves. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of desperate activity. While politicians on the surface held emergency sessions and religious leaders tried to make sense of humanity's sudden demotion in the cosmic pecking order, the real work happened in bunkers and military installations where Earth's finest minds tackled the impossible problem of fighting gods. Dr. Elizabeth Park, formerly of CERN and currently humanity's only expert on alien technology, worked without sleep analyzing every scrap of sensor data they could gather. Her conclusions were not encouraging. The Council ships used some form of exotic matter manipulation that made their hulls effectively impervious to conventional weapons. Their energy shields could probably shrug off nuclear weapons like summer rain. Their engines bent spacetime in ways that made Einstein weep. But Dr. Park had also noticed something interesting. They're overconfident, she told Chen during a briefing on Hour 67. Look at these energy distribution patterns. They're running minimum power to their defensive systems because they don't think we pose any threat at all. Their shields are designed to stop energy weapons and kinetic projectiles moving at significant fractions of light speed. But not designed to stop what, exactly? Dr. Park's grin was slightly manic from too much caffeine and too little sleep. Ever hear of asymmetric warfare, Captain? They're prepared for a fight with another spacefaring civilization. Plasma cannons, antimatter missiles, all the toys that come with 10,000 years of technological development. They're not prepared for humans. Meanwhile, Commander Jake Morrison and his team at the Special Operations Command had been working on a different kind of problem. Morrison was a man who had made a career out of getting into places where he wasn't wanted and breaking things that weren't supposed to break. The alien integration fleet represented the ultimate locked door. The collection points they've designated are all in major population centers, he reported, pointing at a map covered in red circles. Standard procedure would be to land heavy transports, load up the locals, and ship them off to wherever they send new pets. But, here's the thing, they have to actually land those transports. Chen studied the map. Each red circle marked a place where millions of humans would be gathered, helpless, waiting for alien ships to descend from orbit and take them away forever. Unless someone decided to make that landing a very unpleasant experience. How many ships are we talking about for each collection point? Intelligence estimates suggest transport vessels roughly the size of aircraft carriers. Maybe a dozen per major city, with escort craft for security. The transports will be lightly armed, they're designed for hauling cargo, not fighting wars. And they'll have to drop their shields to take on passengers, Chen mused. The plan that emerged from those desperate hours would have been laughed out of any military academy in the solar system. It violated every principle of conventional warfare and relied on a level of coordination that had never been attempted in human history. It also assumed that the aliens would make the same mistake that every invading force throughout history had eventually made: they would underestimate the people they were trying to conquer. At hour 71 and 57 minutes, High Admiral Vexthani stood on the bridge of the Sovereign's Reach and reviewed the integration timeline with the satisfaction of someone who had performed the same task countless times before. The primitive world below showed all the expected signs of a species in the final stages of pre-integration: panic, mass gatherings, frantic communications, and the kind of desperate activity that always preceded acceptance of council authority. "Admiral, we're detecting some unusual energy signatures from the planet's surface," reported his sensor operator, a young Zelkan whose nervous system was specifically evolved to process complex data streams. "Multiple nuclear reactors coming online simultaneously, and some kind of massive electrical buildup in the planet's ionosphere." Vexthani didn't even look up from his reports. "Standard pre-integration industrial shutdown, Lieutenant. The primitives always try to hide their most dangerous technology before we arrive. Let them play with their toys, in a few hours, none of it will matter." At hour 72 exactly, the alien transports began their descent toward Earth's major cities. They came down slowly, majestically, their hulls glowing with contained energy as they prepared to load the first batch of humanity's children onto ships bound for distant stars. They had no idea that hidden in warehouses, basement workshops, and military installations around the globe, 10,000 humans were putting the finishing touches on devices that no sane civilization would ever think to build. Weapons that violated every treaty on civilized warfare. Tools designed not to destroy alien ships, but to do something far worse: to embarrass them. The integration of Earth was about to become the most spectacular failure in Galactic Council history, and it would all start with a question that no alien species had ever thought to ask: what happens when you try to domesticate a species that isn't quite done being wild? Captain Chen stood in the command center, watching the first alien transports break through the cloud layer above New York City, and smiled. In 60 seconds, the Galactic Council was about to learn something that every human general since Sun Tzu had known by heart: the best way to win an impossible war is to change the rules of the game. The first transport ship descended through Manhattan's skyline like a falling mountain, its hull casting shadows across Central Park where 50,000 humans had dutifully gathered at the designated collection point. From the ship's perspective, the scene below must have looked perfectly routine: orderly crowds, minimal panic, the kind of resignation that came with facing overwhelming technological superiority. What the aliens couldn't see were the thousands of humans who weren't in the park at all. Marcus Thompson crouched in the maintenance tunnel beneath Fifth Avenue, his hands steady despite the fact that he was about to commit what was technically an act of interstellar terrorism. The device in front of him looked like something a mad scientist might have built in his garage, which was actually pretty close to the truth. Dr. Park and her team had spent 60 hours cobbling it together from components that could be found in any decent electronics shop. 60 seconds to target acquisition, crackled the voice in his earpiece. Above ground, spotters with military-grade binoculars were tracking the alien transport's descent, waiting for the moment when its shields would have to drop to begin loading passengers. Marcus checked his watch. Around the world, 9,000 other humans were crouched in similar positions, their own improvised devices aimed at the sky. The plan required split-second timing and a level of coordination that would have impressed a Swiss watchmaker. It also required that every participant be completely insane, which, as it turned out, was humanity's secret weapon. 30 seconds. The alien transport settled into position above Central Park, its massive bulk blocking out the sun. Energy barriers shimmered as the ship's systems prepared for passenger loading. From the crowd below, there were gasps and cries as the reality of leaving Earth forever finally sank in. Shields dropping. "All teams, you are go." Marcus flipped the switch. Around the globe, 10,000 homemade electromagnetic pulse devices fired simultaneously. The plan had been Dr. Park's brainchild, born from a simple observation: the aliens had shields designed to stop weapons, not carefully timed bursts of electromagnetic radiation that mimicked natural solar phenomena. The devices wouldn't damage the ship's main systems, but they would do something far more valuable. They would knock out the aliens' communications for exactly 47 minutes. High Admiral Vexthani was reviewing passenger loading reports when every screen on the Sovereign's Reach went dark. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the bridge in an ominous red glow as his crew scrambled to determine what had gone wrong. "Report," he barked, his carefully maintained composure finally showing cracks. "Complete communications blackout, Admiral. All transport vessels, all escort ships, everything below orbital altitude is dark. We're detecting massive electromagnetic interference from the planet's surface, but the pattern doesn't match any known weapon system." Vexthani's four eyes narrowed. In 10,000 years of galactic integration, no species had ever mounted an electromagnetic attack during the loading phase. It was such an obviously futile gesture that the possibility had never been seriously considered. What was the point of cutting communications if you couldn't actually hurt the ships? Time to restore contact? 47 minutes, Admiral. Our systems will automatically filter out the interference by then. 47 minutes. Long enough for confusion, but not long enough for any real damage. Vexthani settled back in his command chair. Continue integration procedures. The transports have their orders and sufficient intelligence to complete the operation without constant supervision. It was exactly the response Captain Chen had predicted. Below the alien ships, the real operation began. Commander Morrison had spent his career studying the fine art of urban warfare, but he had never imagined fighting a battle where the enemy couldn't call for backup. As the transport ship above Central Park lowered its loading ramps, seemingly oblivious to the fact that it was now completely cut off from the rest of the fleet, Morrison felt the familiar calm that came before engaging an enemy that had no idea it was in trouble. All teams, execute Phase 2. The 50,000 humans in Central Park suddenly weren't standing around looking defeated anymore. Instead, they were running in carefully rehearsed patterns that had been drilled into them during 3 days of intensive preparation. What looked like panic was actually the most complex piece of choreography in human history, designed to create maximum confusion while moving specific individuals to specific positions. Sarah Kim had been a competitive shooter before the aliens arrived. Now she was something considerably more dangerous, a human with a sniper rifle, unlimited ammunition, and absolutely nothing to lose. Her target wasn't the alien ship itself, her bullets couldn't penetrate the hull even with the shields down. Her target was much more valuable. The alien loading crews had descended from their ship wearing what appeared to be environmental suits designed for atmosphere processing and crowd control. The suits were clearly high-tech, with integrated sensors and communication systems that would have been impressive by human standards. They were also designed to protect against energy weapons, toxic atmospheres, and biological contamination. They were not designed to protect against a .308 Winchester round to the helmet's communication array. Sarah's first shot took out the lead alien suit communications with a precision that would have made her old shooting instructor proud. Around the park, 50 other snipers opened fire simultaneously, each one targeting a different piece of alien equipment. Not to kill, though nobody would have complained if that happened, but to blind and deafen the loading crews. The aliens found themselves suddenly unable to coordinate, unable to call for help, and facing 50,000 humans who were no longer acting like docile passengers. Dr. Amanda Foster had been a riot control specialist with the NYPD before retiring to teach criminal justice. When the aliens announced their integration plan, she came out of retirement to help design what she privately thought of as the most elaborate riot in human history. As alien crew members stumbled around the park trying to figure out why their equipment had stopped working, Dr. Foster's teams put years of crowd control research to work in reverse. Instead of dispersing a crowd, they were weaponizing one. Team Alpha, initiate Confusion Protocol 7, she spoke into her radio, watching as groups of humans began moving in patterns designed to create maximum disorientation. Team Beta, begin equipment appropriation. Equipment appropriation was a polite term for something much simpler, stealing everything the aliens had that wasn't nailed down, then figuring out how to nail down the things that were. As the confused alien crew members tried to restore order, they found themselves surrounded by humans who seemed to be everywhere at once, grabbing tools, scanners, and anything else that looked important. The aliens had energy weapons, but they were programmed to stun, not kill. The Galactic Council took a very dim view of unnecessary casualties during integration procedures. Unfortunately, this meant that their weapons were useless against an enemy that refused to stay down after being stunned. Marcus Chen, no relation to Captain Chen, despite the name, was a professional magician in his day job. He had volunteered for the operation because he was uniquely qualified to understand the most important principle of chaos warfare: it's not about hurting the enemy, it's about making them doubt everything they think they know. As an alien crew member tried to use what looked like a high-tech tablet to restore order to the loading process, Marcus simply walked up to him, smiled, and made the device disappear. The alien stared at its empty hands in bewilderment, then turned to its companion for help only to discover that its companion's equipment had also vanished. Around the park, dozens of other magicians, pickpockets, and reformed thieves were putting their skills to work in the service of planetary defense. The aliens found themselves in the surreal position of being robbed by the very people they were supposed to be loading onto their ship. But the real masterstroke was happening above ground. Technical Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez had spent 8 years maintaining military radar systems before transferring to the Space Defense Command. Her specialty was electronic warfare, and she had personally designed the devices that were currently attached to the bottom of every alien transport ship in the world. The devices were simple in concept: magnetic clamps that could attach to any metallic surface, coupled with transmitters that broadcast on frequencies the aliens used for navigation and ship-to-ship communication. When the alien communication systems came back online in 37 minutes, they would find that every transport ship was now broadcasting a continuous loop of something that no Galactic Council regulation had ever anticipated. Earth's most annoying pop songs, played at maximum volume on every frequency the aliens used. High Admiral Vexthani would later describe the experience as psychological warfare of the most primitive and effective kind. For 37 straight minutes, every alien communication channel would be flooded with an endless stream of Baby Shark, the Macarena, and It's a Small World After All, performed by children's choirs and played on instruments that seemed specifically designed to cause auditory suffering. But even that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was happening in cities around the world, where similar operations were stripping alien transport crews of their equipment, their dignity, and their confidence in the integration process. By the time communications were restored, the Galactic Council would discover that they had lost control of the situation so completely that their own operational procedures had become meaningless. In Tokyo, alien crew members found themselves trapped in an elevator that had been reprogrammed to play elevator music at volumes that could be heard 3 blocks away. In London, the aliens discovered that their environmental suits had been upgraded with paint that glowed in the dark and spelled out rude words in 17 different languages. In Sydney, the transport ship's landing ramp had been greased with a substance that made it impossible to walk up without falling down in what appeared to be a carefully choreographed comedy routine. The aliens weren't being hurt. They weren't even being seriously threatened. They were being humiliated by creatures they had dismissed as primitives, and they had no framework for understanding how to respond to an enemy that treated warfare as performance art. Commander Morrison watched the chaos unfolding around Central Park and allowed himself a small smile. Phase 2 was proceeding exactly as planned. The aliens were confused, their equipment was compromised, and their neat integration timeline had been turned into a 3-ring circus. But Phase 2 was just the opening act. The real show was about to begin. All teams, prepare for Phase 3, he spoke into his radio. Time to show these cosmic tourists what humans do when we're really motivated. Above them, the massive transport ship hung in the air like a patient whale, waiting for its crew to restore order and begin loading passengers. The ship's sensors could detect the chaos below, but without communications, the crew couldn't coordinate a response. They were reduced to watching helplessly as their carefully planned operation disintegrated into farce. What they didn't realize was that the farce was intentional. Every act of apparent randomness was part of a larger design. Every moment of confusion was buying time for the teams that were working on something much more ambitious than equipment theft and practical jokes. Dr. Park had spent the communications blackout period doing something that no alien engineer had ever imagined a primitive species might attempt. She was reverse engineering their technology in real time, using stolen devices and educated guesswork to figure out how to turn the aliens' own systems against them. "I think I've got it," she announced over the tactical channel, her voice tight with excitement and exhaustion. Their environmental suits are networked to the transport ship's main computer. I can't hack the ship directly, but if I can compromise enough suits, I might be able to convince the ship's computer that it's landed on a planet with a toxic atmosphere. The implications hit Morrison immediately. You're talking about triggering an emergency quarantine protocol. Exactly. The ship will seal itself and refuse to take on any passengers until the supposed contamination is cleared. Could buy us hours. Morrison grinned. Around the world, similar breakthroughs were happening as humanity's finest minds worked to turn alien technology into alien problems. It was asymmetric warfare at its finest, using the enemy's sophistication against them. Do it, Doctor. And, while you're at it, see if you can figure out how to make their coffee machines play polka music. We might as well be thorough. As the communications blackout entered its final minutes, the scene around every alien transport ship on Earth had transformed from orderly integration to complete pandemonium. The aliens found themselves dealing with problems that no military academy in the galaxy had prepared them for: crowds that refused to be crowds, equipment that had been turned into musical instruments, and an enemy that seemed to be waging war through interpretive dance. High Admiral Vexthani would later review the battle reports and conclude that humanity was the first species in galactic history to weaponize absurdity. It was an accurate assessment, though it failed to capture the deeper truth: humans weren't just being absurd, they were being strategically absurd, with a level of coordination and purpose that revealed a dangerous level of intelligence hiding behind the chaos. The integration of Earth was supposed to be routine. Instead, it was becoming the most documented military disaster in Galactic Council history. And the humans were just getting started. When communications came back online, High Admiral Vexthani was treated to 47 simultaneous status reports that collectively read like a fever dream. Transport crews were requesting immediate extraction. Environmental suits were malfunctioning in ways that defied basic physics. Loading operations had been suspended due to what one confused lieutenant described as coordinated interpretive warfare. But the crown jewel of the situation reports came from Captain Zixtal, commander of the transport vessel hovering above what humans called New York City. His message was brief and carried the kind of barely controlled panic that Vexthani had never heard in the voice of a trained council officer. Admiral, we need immediate assistance. The primitives have somehow convinced our ship's computer that we've landed on a plague world. All loading bays are sealed, environmental systems are running decontamination protocols, and our crew is locked in quarantine. Also, sir, our communications array appears to be playing something called disco music on all frequencies, and we can't make it stop. Vexthani stared at the report in disbelief. In the span of 47 minutes, a species that supposedly hadn't mastered faster-than-light travel had managed to turn a routine integration operation into a complete disaster. Around the bridge of the Sovereign's Reach, his senior staff exchanged glances that carried 10,000 years of military tradition struggling to process something that simply shouldn't be possible. Sir, his tactical officer spoke up hesitantly, we're receiving similar reports from all transport vessels. Equipment failures, communication disruptions, and what the crews are describing as coordinated harassment by indigenous populations. Should we abort the integration and commence orbital bombardment? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Orbital bombardment was the Council's solution for species that proved too troublesome to integrate peacefully. It was efficient, final, and had been used exactly 17 times in galactic history. But it was also an admission of failure, an acknowledgement that the mighty Galactic Council couldn't handle a primitive species without resorting to genocide. Vexthani's pride wrestled with his pragmatism. The humans had clearly prepared for this confrontation in ways that violated every assumption about pre-interstellar civilizations. But they were still just one planet, armed with chemical rockets and primitive nuclear weapons. Surely the situation could be salvaged. Negative on orbital bombardment, he decided. Deploy assault shuttles to support the transport crews. If the primitives want to play games, we'll remind them who has the superior technology. It was exactly the decision Captain Chen had been hoping for. The alien assault shuttles that launched from the Sovereign's Reach were marvels of military engineering. Each one carried a squad of Council warriors equipped with energy weapons, personal shields, and armor that could probably stop a tank round. They were designed to pacify rebellious populations and restore order to chaotic situations. They were not designed to operate in an environment where the laws of physics had been temporarily suspended by human stubbornness. Lieutenant Sarah Kim had given up her sniper rifle for something more ambitious. Working with Dr. Park's team, she had spent the communications blackout period setting up what they were calling surprise parties around potential landing zones. As the first assault shuttle descended toward Central Park, it passed through what appeared to be empty air. What it actually passed through was a cloud of metallic chaff mixed with glitter, soap bubbles, and something that had previously been used for gender reveal parties. The chaff played hell with the shuttle's sensors, the soap bubbles coated the viewport in a rainbow film that made accurate flying nearly impossible, and the gender reveal smoke turned the entire landing zone bright pink. The shuttle pilot, trained in combat maneuvers against sophisticated enemy aircraft, found himself trying to land while blind, sensor dead, and surrounded by what his instruments insisted was celebratory confetti. When the shuttle finally touched down, its occupants emerged to find themselves in the middle of what appeared to be the universe's most hostile surprise party. The human defenders had prepared for them with the kind of attention to detail that military historians would later study in advanced courses on asymmetric warfare. Every landing zone had been turned into a carefully designed obstacle course that tested the limits of alien patience and dignity. The warriors who emerged from the shuttles were immediately greeted by a barrage of water balloons. Not enough to cause injury, but more than enough to make their advanced armor systems malfunction in hilarious ways. The aliens discovered that their energy weapons, designed to punch through military-grade body armor, were completely useless against an enemy that attacked with party favors and circus props. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos had been a drill instructor before the invasion. Her job had been breaking down recruits and building them back up as soldiers. For the alien operation, she had developed something she called reverse psychology warfare, breaking down the enemy's confidence by treating them like particularly slow students. "Attention alien visitors," she announced through a bullhorn as confused council warriors stumbled around Central Park, trying to wipe glitter out of their helmet sensors. "Welcome to Earth's Introduction to Human Combat course. Today we'll be covering Lesson 1, Why Bringing Energy Weapons to a Water Balloon Fight Shows Poor Tactical Thinking." The aliens had no framework for responding to an enemy that provided educational commentary during combat. Their military training covered everything from urban warfare to zero-gravity assault operations, but nobody had ever prepared them for an opponent that lectured them while pelting them with biodegradable party supplies. But the real psychological warfare was happening at the individual level, where humanity's greatest weapon, our complete inability to take anything seriously, was being deployed with devastating effectiveness. Private Jenna Walsh had been a kindergarten teacher before volunteering for what she privately thought of as the galaxy's most important field trip. As an alien warrior approached her position, energy weapon raised, she did something that no military manual in the galaxy had prepared him for. She asked for his autograph. "Oh wow, you're a real space alien," she exclaimed, pulling out a notebook and pen. "Could you sign this for my class? They're going to be so excited when I tell them I met an actual extraterrestrial. Do you have a spaceship? What's your favorite planet? Is it true that you can travel faster than light, or is that just in movies?" The warrior stopped, energy weapon still raised, staring at the small human who was treating his invasion like a show and tell presentation. His training had covered hostage situations, terrorist encounters, and combat against heavily armed insurgents. Nobody had ever mentioned what to do when the enemy wanted to know if aliens had pets. Around Central Park, similar scenes were playing out as humans deployed the ultimate weapon against superior technology, genuine curiosity mixed with complete social obliviousness. Alien warriors found themselves being interviewed by amateur journalists, recruited for selfies by tourists, and asked to judge impromptu talent shows by street performers who had apparently decided that an alien invasion was just another opportunity for audience engagement. The psychological effect on the Council forces was devastating. They had trained for war, prepared for resistance, and equipped themselves for battle. Instead, they were being forced to participate in what appeared to be the galaxy's most chaotic cultural exchange program. Commander Morrison watched the confusion spreading through the alien ranks and allowed himself a moment of professional satisfaction. Phase 3 was proceeding exactly as planned. The aliens were discovering that superior technology meant nothing when your enemy refused to fight by the rules. "All teams, initiate Phase 4, he spoke into his radio. Time to show our guests what human engineering can accomplish when we're properly motivated. Phase 4 was Dr. Park's masterpiece, the culmination of 72 hours of desperate innovation and creative physics abuse. While the aliens had been dealing with water balloons and impromptu interviews, her teams had been installing what they called reality adjustment devices throughout the transport ships. The devices were marvels of human engineering, not because they were sophisticated, but because they accomplished impossible things using completely ridiculous methods. Each one was essentially a collection of car batteries, old television components, and electronics salvaged from broken appliances, all wired together in configurations that would have given safety inspectors heart attacks. What they did, however, was remarkable. By generating specific frequencies of electromagnetic radiation, they could interfere with the alien ship's artificial gravity systems, environmental controls, and navigation computers. The result was that every alien transport vessel suddenly found itself dealing with problems that their engineers had never imagined. Gravity inside the ships began fluctuating randomly, causing alien crew members to float to the ceiling one moment and slam into the floor the next. Environmental systems started generating weather patterns inside the ships, not dangerous weather, but annoying weather. Light rain in the corridors, gentle breezes in the engine rooms, and occasional snow flurries in the command centers. The navigation computers became convinced that the ships were actually submarines, and began automatically adjusting course to avoid underwater obstacles that didn't exist. Climate control systems decided that the optimal temperature for alien comfort was either freezing cold or uncomfortably warm, and switched between the two every 30 seconds. Most importantly, the ship's communication systems began translating all internal messages into what the computers identified as the local dominant language. Unfortunately, the computers had learned Earth languages by monitoring television broadcasts, which meant that all military communications were now being rendered in the style of soap opera dialogue. High Admiral Vexthani listened to a status report that began, "My darling Captain, I'm afraid our pulse cannons are experiencing technical difficulties that may tear us apart forever," and realized that humanity had somehow managed to turn military communications into bad television drama. "Sir," his communications officer said, struggling to maintain professional composure, "Transport 7 is reporting that their computer has begun referring to all crew members as sweethearts and sugar plums, and it's refusing to respond to any commands that aren't phrased as romantic poetry." The bridge fell silent except for the gentle hum of technology that was still functioning normally. Around the command center, officers who had spent decades managing the precise machinery of galactic conquest stared at displays showing chaos that defied rational explanation. "Sir," the tactical officer spoke up hesitantly, "perhaps we should consider that these humans are more dangerous than our initial assessments suggested." It was the first time anyone had suggested that Earth might pose an actual threat to the Galactic Council, and the words hung in the air like an accusation. Vexthani turned to study the tactical display, where the planet below was highlighted in the soft blue that indicated a routine integration target. But there was nothing routine about what was happening. In less than 4 hours, a species that supposedly couldn't even reach their own moon reliably had managed to turn the Council's most advanced military technology into a malfunctioning comedy show. They had demonstrated capabilities that didn't appear in any intelligence report, tactics that violated every assumption about primitive warfare, and a level of coordination that suggested they had been planning for this confrontation far longer than anyone had realized. "Tactical analysis," Vexthani ordered. "What are we actually dealing with down there?" The tactical officer consulted his displays, cross-referencing sensor data with the chaos reports coming in from the surface. What he found made him question everything he thought he knew about galactic civilization. "Sir, the humans appear to have weaponized their entire civilian infrastructure. Every major city is coordinating defensive operations using communication networks we can't intercept. They're deploying technology that our sensors can't properly classify. It reads as primitive electronics, but it's producing effects that our most advanced equipment can't counter." He paused, reviewing data that seemed to violate the basic principles of technological development. "More concerning, sir, they appear to have reverse-engineered our technology using methods that our own engineers consider theoretically impossible. They've turned our environmental suits into broadcasting equipment, our navigation systems into entertainment centers, and our transport ships into flying circuses." The words hit Vexthani like a physical blow. Reverse engineering Council technology was supposed to require centuries of scientific advancement and resources that only a galactic-level civilization could marshal. The humans had apparently done it in less than 3 days using spare parts and determination. Recommendations? Sir, I believe we may be dealing with a species that has been deliberately concealing their true technological capabilities. The evidence suggests they've been preparing for interstellar contact far longer than our intelligence indicated, and they've developed countermeasures specifically designed to neutralize Council integration procedures. It was a possibility that had never been seriously considered. The humans had been studied for decades, their technology assessed and catalogued according to standard procedures. Everything indicated a typical pre-interstellar species: primitive rockets, nuclear weapons, basic electronics. Nothing that suggested they could pose a threat to ships that could crack planets. But the evidence was undeniable. Somehow, the humans had been ready for them. Sir, the communications officer interrupted, we're receiving a transmission from the planet's surface. It's coming from their military command structure, and they're requesting a formal parley. Vexthani almost laughed. A parley. The primitive humans, after demonstrating that they could turn Council technology into a joke, were asking for a formal meeting to discuss terms. It was either the height of arrogance or the most sophisticated psychological warfare he had ever encountered. Put it through. Captain Chen's face appeared on the main display, and Vexthani found himself studying her expression for clues about what kind of species they were really dealing with. She looked tired but determined, and there was something in her eyes that reminded him of predators he had encountered on worlds where evolution had produced creatures that survived by being smarter than their prey. "Hi, Admiral Vexthani," she said, her voice carrying the kind of calm authority that came from commanding respect rather than demanding it. "I believe we need to talk." "Indeed, Captain Chen. Your species has proven surprisingly resourceful. But surely you understand that this resistance is ultimately futile. We have technology that your people cannot hope to match." Chen's smile was sharp enough to cut steel. "Admiral, with all due respect, I think you're operating under some fundamental misunderstandings about human capabilities. We've had your transport crews trapped in soap bubbles for the past 2 hours, and your flagship's computer apparently thinks it's a carnival ride. At what point does superior technology become a liability?" The question hung between them, carrying implications that made Vexthani's carefully maintained confidence waver. Around the bridge, his officers were staring at the human captain with expressions that mixed professional assessment with dawning respect. "What are you proposing, Captain?" "A demonstration, Admiral. Something to help you understand what you're really dealing with before this situation gets out of hand. Because what you've seen so far, that was us being polite." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the Sovereign's Reach in contemplative silence. Outside the ship's massive windows, Earth hung below them like a blue-green marble, beautiful and serene. It looked like exactly the kind of peaceful world that the Council had integrated 1,000 times before. But appearances, Vexthani was beginning to realize, could be very deceiving indeed. The demonstration began with something that looked deceptively simple, every light on Earth turning on and off in perfect synchronization. From orbit, the planet's surface flickered like a cosmic lighthouse, bright then, bright again, in patterns that were clearly artificial and clearly coordinated across the entire globe. High Admiral Vexthani watched the display with growing unease. Coordinating planetary electrical systems required infrastructure and communication networks that supposedly didn't exist on primitive worlds. Yet somehow, the humans were treating their entire planet like a single massive display screen. "Sir," his sensor operator reported, voice tight with something approaching awe, "we're detecting synchronized electromagnetic pulses from every major population center. The humans are using their power grid as a weapon." It was an understatement. Dr. Park and her global network of engineers had spent the last 6 hours turning Earth's electrical infrastructure into the largest electromagnetic pulse generator in the solar system. Every power plant, every transformer station, every electrical circuit on the planet had been modified to participate in what they were calling Operation Lighthouse. The goal wasn't to damage the alien ships, the energy output was carefully controlled to avoid causing actual harm. The goal was to demonstrate something far more important, that humanity could coordinate planetary-scale operations with the precision of a Swiss watch. Phase 1 complete, Dr. Park announced from her command center deep beneath CERN. Initiating Phase 2. All stations, prepare for the Aurora Protocol. Around the globe, teams of physicists and engineers who had spent their careers pushing the boundaries of human knowledge prepared to push a little further. The Aurora Protocol was theoretically impossible according to current human understanding of atmospheric physics. It involved using carefully timed electromagnetic pulses to create artificial aurora displays anywhere on Earth, regardless of latitude or magnetic field strength. The night sky above New York exploded into sheets of green and gold light that danced across the atmosphere in patterns that spelled out messages in a dozen different alien languages. Similar displays appeared over London, Tokyo, Mumbai, and Sao Paulo, each one carrying the same message in perfect galactic standard script: "Greetings from Earth. We need to talk." From the bridge of the Sovereign's Reach, Vexthani watched a planet that supposedly couldn't master interstellar communication casually rewrite atmospheric physics to send messages visible from orbit. His tactical computers were struggling to classify what they were seeing. The energy patterns didn't match any known weapon system, but they clearly represented technology far beyond anything in Earth's official capabilities assessment. "Sir," his communications officer said quietly, "they're broadcasting on our secure military frequencies. The same message that's written in the Aurora displays, but they're using our own encryption protocols." The implications hit like a physical blow. The humans had somehow gained access to Galactic Council military encryption, which meant they had been monitoring Council communications far longer than anyone had suspected. Everything about this species was wrong, starting with the fundamental assumption that they were primitive. "Admiral," Captain Chen's voice came through the ship's communication system, somehow bypassing every security protocol the Council had developed over 10 millennia of galactic dominance. "I hope you're beginning to understand our situation. We need to discuss terms." Vexthani looked around his bridge, where officers who had never experienced military failure were staring at displays that showed their own technology being casually outmaneuvered by creatures who supposedly couldn't build faster than light engines. The careful superiority that came with representing galactic civilization was cracking under the weight of evidence that maybe, just maybe, they weren't the smartest species in the galaxy after all. "Open a channel," he ordered. The main screen shimmered to life, showing Captain Chen in what appeared to be an underground command center filled with technology that looked both primitive and impossibly sophisticated. Behind her, Vexthani could see displays showing real-time status reports from around the globe, a coordination network that rivaled anything the Council used for managing entire star systems. "Captain Chen," he said, struggling to maintain the diplomatic authority that had served him through a century of successful integrations, "you have our attention." "Thank you, Admiral. Let me be direct, your integration procedures are based on assumptions about human capabilities that are fundamentally incorrect. We've spent the last several hours demonstrating that we can neutralize your technology, coordinate planetary defense operations, and reverse engineer your equipment faster than your tactical computers can process. This isn't a primitive species that needs to be elevated to galactic civilization. This is a civilization that's been preparing for galactic contact on our own terms." The words carried the weight of absolute confidence backed by demonstrated capability. Around Chen, her staff worked at consoles that were simultaneously analyzing alien technology and coordinating defensive operations across multiple continents. It was a level of multitasking that suggested intelligence capabilities far beyond what the Council's assessments had indicated. "What are you proposing?" Vexthani asked, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew the answer. "A partnership, Admiral. Not integration, partnership. We're offering the Galactic Council something it's never had before, an equal relationship with a species that can contribute as much as it receives." Vexthani's response was interrupted by alarms throughout the Sovereign's Reach. Every screen on the bridge lit up with warnings as the ship's sensors detected something that should have been impossible: massive electromagnetic signatures rising from Earth's surface, growing stronger by the second. "Report," he barked. "Sir, we're detecting energy buildups at 17 locations around the planet. The signatures are, sir, their reading is weapons charges. Massive ones." Through the ship's massive windows, Vexthani could see lights beginning to appear on Earth's surface, not the gentle glow of cities, but focused beams that reached up toward the darkness of space like fingers of concentrated starlight. Captain Chen's image remained steady on the communication screen. "Admiral, what you're seeing is the result of 72 hours of human engineering applied to problems that your species solved 10,000 years ago. We call them mass drivers, electromagnetic accelerators capable of launching projectiles at significant fractions of light speed. The tactical implications were staggering. Mass drivers were theoretical weapons that could accelerate small projectiles to velocities that made them more destructive than nuclear weapons. Building them required materials science and engineering capabilities that were supposed to be centuries beyond human reach. The projectiles themselves are quite simple, Chen continued conversationally. Steel rods about the size of telephone poles, accelerated to roughly 10% of light speed. At those velocities, they carry enough kinetic energy to punch through any armor we've ever heard of. Including yours. Vexthani's mouth went dry. The humans were describing kinetic kill weapons, the kind of technology that civilizations used to crack planets or destroy entire fleets. The Council's own ships carried similar weapons, but they required exotic matter and energy sources that primitive species couldn't hope to obtain. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice carried less conviction than he intended. Chen's smile was sharp as a blade. "Admiral, we've spent the last 6 hours proving that human engineering capabilities are somewhat more advanced than your files indicate. Would you really like to test whether we're bluffing about weapons that could turn your flagship into an expanding cloud of superheated plasma?" The bridge fell silent except for the continuing alarms as Earth's mass drivers charged to full power. On the tactical display, 17 red dots marked weapons installations that had apparently been constructed in secret while the Council fleet watched from orbit. Weapons that could threaten ships designed to survive stellar warfare. "Sir," the tactical officer spoke quietly, "if those weapons are real, they represent a genuine threat to fleet operations. Our shields are designed to deflect energy weapons and conventional projectiles, but kinetic penetrators at those velocities." He didn't need to finish. Everyone on the bridge understood the mathematics of kinetic warfare. A projectile moving at 10% of light speed carried enough energy to overwhelm any practical defense system. The only protection was not being there when it arrived. "How?" Vexthani asked. "How did a primitive species develop weapons technology that rivals our own?" Chen's expression grew thoughtful. "Admiral, I think that's the wrong question. The right question is, what other assumptions about human capabilities might be incorrect? Because what you're seeing isn't the result of primitive engineering. It's the result of a species that has been preparing for interstellar contact for much longer than you think." She gestured, and the display behind her shifted to show a timeline that made Vexthani's blood run cold. Radio telescope data stretching back decades. Astronomical observations of Council fleet movements. Communication intercepts from galactic traffic that should have been impossible to detect from a single star system. "We've been listening, Admiral. Watching. Learning. Every species that made contact with the Council provided data points about your technology, your procedures, your assumptions about how integration operations work. We've had over 50 years to prepare for this moment." The revelation hit like a tsunami. 50 years of preparation meant that Earth had been planning for contact since before most of the current Council leadership had been born. It meant that every assumption about human development, every assessment of their technological capabilities, every strategic calculation about integration difficulty had been based on completely false information. "You've been deliberately concealing your technological development," Vexthani said. "We've been developing along pathways that your assessment protocols don't look for," Chen corrected. "The Council expects species to advance in predictable patterns, fusion power, then antimatter, then exotic matter manipulation. You don't look for species that figure out how to build relativistic weapons using electromagnetic acceleration and materials science." She had a point. The Council's technological assessments were based on thousands of successful integrations, creating patterns that were considered universal laws of development. Species that could build kinetic kill weapons were supposed to have already mastered faster than light travel. Species that could coordinate planetary-scale engineering projects were supposed to have unified global governments. Humanity had apparently decided that those rules didn't apply to them. "Sir," the sensor operator announced, "the energy buildup from the planet's surface has reached critical levels. Those mass drivers are fully charged and targeted on our position." Vexthani looked at the tactical display, where 17 red dots marked weapons that could destroy his flagship and everything aboard it. Then, he looked at Captain Chen, who was watching him with the patience of someone holding a royal flush in a poker game. "What are your terms?" he asked. "Simple, Admiral. The Galactic Council recognizes Earth as an independent member species with full voting rights and technological sovereignty. No integration, no relocation, no administrative oversight. In exchange, we're prepared to share some very interesting innovations in engineering and materials science that might benefit galactic civilization." The offer was unprecedented. No species had ever demanded equal status during first contact, and no integration operation had ever been converted into a diplomatic negotiation. But, then, no species had ever held kinetic kill weapons to the Council's flagship while making their demands. And, if the Council refuses? Chen's smile didn't waver, but her eyes grew cold. "Admiral, we've demonstrated that we can neutralize your technology, coordinate global defensive operations, and build weapons that can threaten your most advanced ships. What do you think happens if you force us to prove that we're willing to use them?" The question hung in the air like a sword suspended over everything the Galactic Council represented. For 10,000 years, they had been the supreme authority in the galaxy, the final arbiters of civilization and order. They had never faced a species that could credibly threaten their dominance. Until now. "I need to consult with Council leadership," Vexthani said finally. "Of course, Admiral. Take all the time you need. We're patient people. We've waited 50 years for this conversation, we can wait a little longer for your answer." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the Sovereign's reach in stunned silence. Through the massive windows, Earth continued to glow with the energy signatures of weapons that shouldn't exist, built by a species that had apparently been planning for this moment since before most galactic civilizations had achieved spaceflight. Vexthani stared at the planet below and realized that everything he thought he knew about galactic civilization had just been proved wrong by a species that had turned integration warfare into an art form. The humans weren't primitive. They were patient. And that, he was beginning to understand, made them the most dangerous species the galaxy had ever encountered. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in virtual space, with representatives from across the galaxy appearing as holographic projections in the ancient amphitheater that had hosted diplomatic discussions for 10 millennia. High Admiral Vexthani stood before them, still shaken by his encounter with a species that had somehow managed to hold the Council's most advanced warship hostage using weapons that shouldn't exist. "Honored counselors," he began, his voice carrying the strain of an officer whose career had just encountered something outside all previous experience. "The integration of Sol 3 has encountered complications." Counselor Prime Ythgara, whose species had been among the founding members of the galactic community, leaned forward in her ceremonial robes. "Complications, Admiral? Your preliminary reports suggested routine integration of a primitive species. Are you telling us that chemical rocket savages have somehow resisted Council authority?" The question carried the weight of 10,000 years of unopposed dominance, and Vexthani felt the burden of having to explain the impossible. Around the amphitheater, representatives from hundreds of worlds watched with the kind of attention usually reserved for declarations of war. "Honored Counselor, the species designation of primitive appears to have been inaccurate. The humans have demonstrated technological capabilities that exceed our intelligence assessments by several orders of magnitude. They have neutralized our transport operations, compromised our communication systems, and constructed kinetic weapons platforms capable of threatening fleet operations." The statement created a ripple of shocked silence that spread through the assembled representatives like a wave. Counselor Zekthal of the Warrior Caste rose from his seat, his forearms crossed in a gesture of disbelief. "You're telling us that a single system species has built weapons that can threaten Council warships?" "Admiral, the Sovereign's reach is protected by energy shields that can withstand stellar radiation. Its armor can resist antimatter bombardment. What kind of weapons could these primitives possibly have developed?" Vexthani activated the holographic display, showing technical readouts from Earth's mass drivers. The energy signatures were unmistakable electromagnetic accelerators operating at power levels that rivaled the Council's most advanced installations. "Kinetic kill weapons, Counselor. 17 installations capable of accelerating projectiles to 10% of light speed. At those velocities, our defensive systems are inadequate to prevent catastrophic damage. The display shifted to show footage from the failed integration attempts, alien technology being casually subverted, transport crews trapped in soap bubbles, and ships whose computers had been convinced to play children's music on all communication frequencies. It was a level of technological sophistication hidden behind a facade of absurdist theater. Counselor Prime Ythgara studied the data with the kind of attention that had made her species legendary for strategic analysis. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who had spent centuries evaluating threats to galactic stability. Admiral, these recordings suggest that the humans have been deliberately concealing their capabilities. The level of coordination required for planetary-scale defensive operations indicates infrastructure and communication networks that our assessment teams failed to detect. She paused, reviewing data that challenged fundamental assumptions about technological development patterns. More concerning, their ability to reverse engineer our technology suggests scientific capabilities that approach our own. How long do your analysts believe they have been preparing for contact? At least 50 years, honored counselor. Possibly longer. We have evidence that they have been monitoring galactic communications and studying council integration procedures through observation of other species' first contact experiences. The implications rippled through the assembly like shock waves. A species that had spent decades preparing for council contact was a species that had turned first contact into a strategic planning exercise. It suggested a level of patience and long-term thinking that few galactic civilizations possessed. Counselor Zekthal stood again, his warrior's instincts clearly struggling with the concept of being outmaneuvered by supposedly primitive aliens. Recommendations, Admiral? Vexthani had spent the last 6 hours wrestling with that exact question. The military options were limited. Orbital bombardment would eliminate the threat, but it would also destroy a species that had demonstrated capabilities the Council had never encountered. The diplomatic options were unprecedented. No integration had ever been converted into an equal partnership negotiation. The humans have proposed formal recognition as an independent Council member species with full technological sovereignty. In exchange, they offer to share their innovations in engineering and materials science. The suggestion created an uproar that echoed through the virtual amphitheater. Representatives who had spent millennia as the galaxy's only arbiters of civilization found themselves confronting the possibility that they might have to treat a single-system species as equals. Counselor Vithram of the science cast raised a tentacle for attention. Admiral, what specific technologies are they offering? Our analysis suggests that their materials science capabilities exceed our own in several areas. Vexthani activated another display, showing technical specifications that had been transmitted from Earth during the negotiations. The data made several representatives gasp in recognition. Engineering solutions to problems that had puzzled galactic science for centuries. Room temperature superconductors, Counselor. Materials that maintain zero electrical resistance under normal atmospheric conditions. Their electromagnetic weapons platforms are built using technology that our physicists consider theoretical. The statement created another wave of shocked silence. Room temperature superconductors were the holy grail of materials science, a technology that would revolutionize everything from power distribution to spacecraft design. If the humans had actually achieved practical applications, their offer represented value far beyond normal first contact exchanges. Additionally, Vexthani continued, they have demonstrated breakthroughs in electromagnetic field manipulation, distributed computing networks, and what they call asymmetric warfare doctrine. Their military strategists have developed conflict resolution methods that effectively neutralize technological superiority through unconventional tactics. Counselor Prime Ythgara leaned back in her seat, processing implications that stretched far beyond the immediate crisis. A species that could neutralize technological advantage was a species that could threaten the fundamental basis of Council authority. Admiral, in your professional assessment, could this species pose a threat to galactic stability if their innovations were widely distributed? It was the question that had been haunting Vexthani since the negotiations began. The humans had demonstrated capabilities that could fundamentally alter the balance of power in galactic civilization. Their weapons technology could threaten any Council fleet. Their engineering innovations could make any species technologically competitive. Their warfare doctrine could turn military superiority into a liability. Yes, honored Counselor. If these technologies were acquired by hostile species, they could destabilize the entire galactic order. The admission hung in the virtual space like a death sentence. For 10 millennia, the Council had maintained peace through overwhelming technological advantage. The possibility that advantage could be neutralized by innovations from a single system species represented an existential threat to everything galactic civilization represented. But, it also represented an opportunity. Councillor Zekthal spoke into the silence, his warrior's pragmatism cutting through the diplomatic complexity. If we cannot defeat them, and we cannot safely ignore them, then, perhaps we should recruit them. The suggestion was heretical by traditional council standards, but it carried the logic of someone who understood that adaptation was often more valuable than dominance. Around the amphitheater, representatives began to murmur as they considered the implications. Explain, Councillor, Ythgara requested. The humans have demonstrated capabilities that we lack and innovations that we need. Rather than viewing them as a threat to be contained, perhaps we should view them as assets to be recruited. Grant them the partnership they demand, gain access to their technologies, and incorporate their strategic thinking into council operations. It was a radical departure from 10,000 years of integration doctrine, but the logic was undeniable. The humans had proven that they could defend themselves against council intervention. They had also proven that they possessed technologies and capabilities that could benefit galactic civilization. Councillor Prime Ythgara called for formal discussion, and the debate that followed would later be recorded as one of the most significant diplomatic sessions in galactic history. Representatives argued for everything from immediate orbital bombardment to full partnership recognition, with positions shifting as new data arrived from the Sol system. The turning point came when Dr. Elizabeth Park transmitted additional technical specifications from Earth's research installations. The data included theoretical frameworks for faster-than-light communication using quantum entanglement, propulsion systems that could achieve interstellar travel without exotic matter, and manufacturing techniques that could produce council-level technology using common materials. When the vote was finally called, the result was closer than anyone had anticipated: 847 in favor of partnership recognition, 623 opposed, with 234 abstentions. It was the narrowest margin in council history for a major policy decision, but it was enough. High Admiral Vexthani received the council's decision while standing on the bridge of the Sovereign's Reach, watching Earth's mass drivers maintain their targeting lock on his ship. When he opened the communication channel to Captain Chen, he carried the weight of a decision that would reshape galactic civilization. Captain Chen, the Galactic Council has voted to recognize Earth as an independent member species with full technological sovereignty and voting rights. Chen's smile was genuine this time, carrying relief as well as satisfaction. Around her command center, her staff erupted in cheers that echoed through the communication channel. Thank you, Admiral. I believe this is the beginning of a very productive relationship. The formal signing ceremony took place 3 days later, with representatives from Earth and the Council meeting aboard the Sovereign's Reach in what was officially designated as neutral space. Captain Chen signed the partnership agreement using a pen that had been manufactured using room-temperature superconductors, while High Admiral Vexthani added his authentication using ceremonial tools that had been blessed by the Council's ancient traditions. The document that emerged from those negotiations would be studied by diplomatic scholars for centuries. It granted Earth unprecedented autonomy within the galactic community while establishing technology-sharing agreements that would accelerate human development by millennia. More importantly, it established the precedent that the Galactic Council was not the final authority on galactic civilization. It was simply the first among equals in a community that was larger and more diverse than anyone had previously imagined. 6 months later, human advisors were working with Council military strategists to develop new approaches to conflict resolution that emphasized technological neutralization over superior firepower. Human engineers were collaborating with galactic scientists to design propulsion systems that made faster-than-light travel accessible to species that had previously been limited to their home systems. Human diplomats were helping to establish communication protocols with species that had been considered too primitive for Council contact. The integration of Earth had failed completely. The partnership with humanity had succeeded beyond anyone's wildest expectations. High Admiral Vexthani, now serving as the Council's first human relations coordinator, often found himself reflecting on the lesson that Earth had taught galactic civilization: sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who refuses to fight by your rules, and sometimes the most valuable ally is the one who forces you to write better rules. The humans had kept their promise to teach the galaxy what happened when you cornered a species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of war against itself. They had also kept their promise to show what that same species could accomplish when it turned its creativity toward building something better than war. The galaxy was still adjusting to the implications, but one thing was certain: the age of unquestioned council dominance was over, and the age of true galactic partnership had begun. And it had all started with soap bubbles, disco music, and the absolutely human conviction that superior technology was just another problem waiting for a creative solution.